Welcome, everyone. I'm Chari Elam with the Bee Supply Monthly Magazine, and I've got somebody with me today that I bet a bunch of you have talked to or heard of, but didn't have a face to the name. I am super happy to have Shannon La Grave. She is a part of the Bee Supply that you may or may not see, because she is the person that folks are now asking for, because she's that in demand to answer questions about beekeeping. When you call the help number or when you go into the store in Blue Ridge, Texas, this is the gal. Okay. Hi, Shannon. How are
Hi,
you?
everyone. Thanks for having me.
Oh gosh, this is, I am very blessed to interview a lot of very well-known beekeepers and super great conversations. But I've really been looking forward to this one, because you and we have talked a lot over the years, and I will say you rank right up there at the top, and I mean this with all of my heart, of knowledge. You've taught me a thing or two. I am always learning, and anyone out there that's listening, if you ever put a brick on your head and say, "I've learned it all," get ready.
Very
Right.
true.
Well, Shannon, tell
I
everybody
agree completely.
right. Tell everybody that doesn't, and most haven't talked with you. So introduce yourself as where you ended up, how you ended up being with us.
So my name is Shannon La Grave, as previously mentioned, and how I started out was actually the same spot Blake started out. I was a scholarship student with Collin County Hobby Beekeepers Association, now 18 years ago, kind of unbelievable. Um, and as a scholarship student, they gave me a hive, they gave me an education, and I became very passionate about the program. And I've followed in similar footsteps. Interestingly enough, I'm still involved with the county club. Now I'm the president of the local Collin County Association. I ran the scholarship program for probably 7 to 10 years. I'm not totally sure of the number. And I love to support the community and be involved. And continuing to support in those roles requires that you also learn. That you're talking to other beekeepers, you're bouncing ideas off of each other, and so you don't stagnate. And you mentioned continuing to learn. I say a couple of things pretty regularly. I don't ever swear by insects. They're going to make fools of you in some way because they'll do something you can't explain all the time.
Yep.
And then also John Talbert, who's a founding member of our club, he always says, if you think you've learned it all, then you are missing something and you need to go back to class. And I find that to be true. No matter how much I learn, there's always more. But yeah, since then, I have been continuing to beekeep. I have right now, I think I'm selling 4 hives tomorrow and 8 nukes. I will have about 24 hives. And I just maintain them. Probably 15 is my low side, and I like them at that level. I sell some honey, I sell some bees to pay for the hobby. And so I'm 100% a hobbyist, what most people are out there. Yeah. But at the same time, there's just no ulterior motive. I love the insects. I enjoy learning about them. I find that there's something new to learn every day because there's new studies coming out. There's more people who are interested. There's 1,000 different hive models to try. And I must admit, I'm sometimes a little skeptical about them. I like my Langstroth style hives. I continue to use them. They work really well for me.
Yeah.
That's how I got started.
That's awesome. So, I know a lot of folks have heard Blake's story, but a club that has a good mentor program, this speaks volumes to what it can do for an individual. It can make a life career out of it at certain levels. I mean, obviously you don't own a big, huge honey production company, but look what you're giving back. The education, the knowledge that you've picked up, experienced, not just picked up, but you've experienced firsthand, makes you an integral part of the bee supply, number one, but also what you're doing in your own, being able to sell bees and be successful at keeping bees. Well, I want to jump right in, because one of your jobs at the Bee Supply in Blue Ridge, Texas, is answering phone calls. What is, and I know this is going to be season specific, but let's say summertime or late spring, summertime. What is a resounding question that just comes over and over that you get from beekeepers? Do you have something that comes to mind?
Probably two statements more than questions this time of year. I have different questions, as you said, that come up every year. And to cover the brief, one of the ones I get all the time in the winter is, how could they have starved? They had honey. That's because it was too far away. They did. And why does their population matter? But when it comes to late summer and spring, I would say the question is, well, why do I have to feed their flowers? Well, in this particular year, we've had a lot of water in this section of Texas.
Mhm.
And every time it rains, it washes out that nectar. And people are like, well, they're surrounded with flowers. How can they be starving? It's because they can't get out and go get them. And when they can, maybe that nectar source hasn't been replenished yet. And so I'm still having to feed some of my smaller hives. My bigger hives are self-supporting, beginning to make honey because it is honey flow here.
Mhm.
But how can they be hungry, which is always a surprise to people? And then why aren't they building wax faster? And that has to do with population. You need a larger number of bees to be able to make that population work. And it's one of those things people don't realize is that they're what's called a eusocial insect. They have to have a large number, a large group, and all of their, by eusocial insect, all their jobs are divided up by age. Because of that, the older bees are the ones that make the wax. If it's a beginning hive, if there's a lot of younger bees, they're not building wax yet. So a lot of times we have to advise them to be patient, to watch what's going on. And very few times does that not work out for them. But why are my bees not building wax is one of the biggest ones. And of course, you can recoat your frames with wax if you need to. That's definitely one of the questions we get this time of year.
Well, and it is, because we're logic driven and we believe that if we see flowers and we see, and we've heard, oh gosh, everywhere I look or YouTube I'm listening to, nectar flow is happening or it's about to happen depending on where you are in the nation, that my bees should be just fine because we almost picture it as going to the refrigerator. I'm hungry. I go to the refrigerator, I fix myself something to eat. I'm satisfied, right? That's not how it works. They're pulling something that basically it's like us pulling raw food out that they've got to almost cook it. They've got to make it into honey to consume and for the future, for future bees. So there's work that has to be involved. And I probably one of the things that I was very just completely clueless on in the beginning was about that. It's early spring, there's flowers, or summer's coming. Why aren't they? There's food right there. Something you said, I think is very good to say. I'm gonna pick 2 points out of it. We've had bad weather, and I don't know about everybody, but the nation has been, the whole southern part of the United States in the recent weeks has been inundated with rain. And your bees are stuck inside. So it could be that the bees are consuming more of what they've been gathering or they've had left over from winter. So that needs to be something we need to look out for, being trapped inside, right?
Absolutely, being trapped inside. And whenever I'm observing whether or not they're eating their food, one of the things I'm looking at is actually the frames themselves. If you look at the outside of the frame, one of those little subtleties you pick up over time is that they begin eating usually from the outside of the frame moving inward. And so when you start seeing random little holes emptying from there and there's no surplus or no shine, no new nectar coming in, then I'm like, oh, they're eating. I'll watch the weather. If the weather's going to be sunny and beautiful, I'm like, they're going to be fine. But if it is going to rain for a week or every 3 days, then I will actually go ahead and feed. And I've had wonderful results with that.
We do the same, really, because we don't want them consuming that. We want them really just taking advantage of the short-term feed situation. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's something to point out. And you can tell as they eat in, you can tell that the bees are eating it. Instead of it growing, it's diminishing. That's really something good to look out for. Let's see, what else was it you said about calling? Callers, are they talking about how do I feed and if it's nectar flow, do I put it in? Do I pull it back out? How can I work that?
Most of the time they're asking at the moment about why are my bees not building, where they're not growing out enough. And again, that's tied to the weather, it's tied to the food, it's tied to the number of bees inside the colony. And so sometimes the answer is patience. I have a slide on our beekeeping 201 that we're going to be putting out, and it is about, okay, what do you do if you see a problem? What happens? So first you ask yourself, is there a queen? Is everything going okay? Yes, there's a queen. Is there something wrong with disease or mites? Okay, no, I've checked for mites. There's no sign of disease that I'm able to see. And disease will mostly be seen in the brood usually. And then you ask yourself, okay, do they have the nutrition they need? Yes, they have the nutrition. Let's say you're seeing pollen. I'm seeing some interesting colors of pollen. I'm seeing some purple, gray, and white primarily. If anyone knows what those flowers are in the area, I would love to know what's producing it, because I've been asked and I don't know the answer. And I like flowers, but I don't know what color their pollen is. And then if they are good on all of those points, they have queen, they have food, they have all of their needs met, there's no sign of disease or pests that's overwhelming them, then what they're going to do is they're actually going to wait. My answer is be patient, see what happens, because you can't always solve it right away. I think that's the hard thing, is it's an art form, it's not a science, more of.
Boy, that's no truer words, Shannon. Everybody put a pin in that one. It is an art form. It's not necessarily a science. And you may have one hive that's doing everything
gangbusters,
gangbusters, and the one right beside it is not. And you're thinking, okay, you've got the same resources, the same conditions, same living conditions. I'm doing exactly the same thing for you, and I'm having completely different results. Is there anything you recommend when somebody will tell you that this hive A, hive B is, what's the problem?
There's also always possibilities of silent things that we can't see, diseases or problems that are not visible to the naked eye. But a lot of the times I look at them and I say, do you have children? And they go, yeah. I said, do you have more than one? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, are they the same? And they're like, no. Do they grow at the same speed? Do they do things at the same? And I know that's odd to relate it to children, but they don't do things at the same speed, which is one of the reasons why when people are starting out, I always say, get 2 hives. This was the great advice I got when I started out. They're like, you need 2 hives. We still give the same advice out, because you're going to see them behave differently, and you don't know why necessarily, but it gives you a gradient. Like if you only have one, you don't know if it's doing poorly or not, because there's nothing to stand it against. And everybody has that A student who's going to be a doctor, usually that first child.
Or if you're like me, that first beehive, you completely killed dead or doorknob. My first child survived, just so y'all know. But that beehive, I didn't, not so well. Not so well, but that's very good advice that, we always would start off with more than one. And if you ever find yourself down to one, it's a good idea to go ahead and either get it to where it's duplicating itself, in other words, making a split, or going ahead and getting another hive to sit with it, because it gives you so many, and this is going to be a segue into my next question. It gives you actually, resources. It gives you a store of bees, of honey, of frames, it's a resource all in itself.
If there's a problem late in
yeah,
the season, it gives you a chance to recover.
it
Maybe they need
does.
brood, and you can move brood in there. Maybe
That's
one's
right.
too weak and you can combine them. It
Exactly.
gives you options.
It
And I
does.
can't tell you how many times I'm on the phone come fall and they're like, what do I do? And I'm like, do you have 2? And the answer, if they have yes is 2, I'm like, okay, you're gonna. Sometimes it's important to know with livestock, with bees, when it's time to cut your losses. If you have a hive that's getting down in size because of that population being too small, then it might be healthy to combine them. I have extremely low losses going into the winter, which is an extraordinary gift. But part of it is when I see a hive that's struggling or not doing well, maybe the queen is flaking out or maybe something's wrong, I'll actually cut my losses. Even though I paid for that queen, I'll kill her and I'll combine the colonies. And then come spring, I split them back out. I never have trouble keeping my populations up because I'm keep taking care of that. It also helps going into cold months because they need that population to stay warm. And
Well,
I've had a great success rate with that method.
and that's excellent. That's what a good beekeeper does. We do. I'll throw in here that we sat through a rather arduous speaker, the very detailed, years ago at a conference that had gone through a study of whether or not it paid to nurse weak hives. And it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And we love our bees. And like you, we keep around a couple of dozen hives for the most part. And we don't have a lot to lose, but if you'll just hang in there and really be the deciding factor of when it's just time to put it aside and keep going and make up that loss next year in splits or further, down the road in splits, you're really going to come out a whole lot better. I want to talk about bee biology because it happens to be my favorite topic. I don't know where it falls because you're so versed in every bit of it, but let's talk about the importance of bee biology, and I'll let you lead that.
So indicators in the biology, this is something I talk about in our class a little bit, and I preface this. There are so many different beekeepers and so many different people who are going to be out there. They're going to be giving you an opinion about how you should do this and why you should do this and where you should do this. It's really hard. People get inundated with a ton of information.
Mm-hmm.
But what you need to know is that regardless of what everybody does, there's a few core facts that aren't going to change. You've got to take care of your pest levels. You got to keep your hive fed. You've got to have a functioning queen and an acceptable population. That's biology. That's taking care of their biological needs. And so being able to be aware of those things means that you can siphon through all of the wonderful creative ideas that there are out there and select what's actually valuable out of them. Mm-hmm. I call it cherry picking. Knowing enough about the biology allows you to cherry pick the best ideas without getting sidetracked on the junk, because everyone knows there's a little bit of that out there. The other thing about biology is it's a wonderful indicator. I have a different talk that's specifically about hive identification, what's going on, what's wrong. And it was based heavily off of questions that we had in the store. Mm-hmm. And it was these concepts like, okay, if you're seeing this, what could be causing it? Biology, most beekeepers can get by without most of it. But when I started learning more about it, when I started understanding egg cycles and timing and other subsections of that, like about pheromones and other times a year where they're going to have more drones versus less drones, mm-hmm. has opened up a greater depth of knowledge mm-hmm. and how I can discern when I look at a hive. For instance, when I look at a hive, the knowledge of bee biology is that whenever you have a queen that's going out to mate, that hive attracts more drones. They're an indicator. Yeah. And so I open up a hive and I'm like, whoo, there's a lot of drones. Maybe there's a lot more activity than usual too. And I start going through, and sure enough, there's usually a virgin queen either about to hatch or already hatched. And it tells me something right away. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I come in and I'm like, okay, I've lost the queen. What happened? And I can timeline track it by, do I have eggs? No. Okay, she's not been there within 3 days. Do I have larvae? Some. And I just went into a hive yesterday where they were trying to raise their own queen, and they had a queen at the last check a week and a half ago. So I had an idea, but I had young larvae. So it was under 10 days old, which tells me that the queen had been there within 10 days, which I already knew. But if you're coming in blind, it gives you a lot of information. When you're going into a hive that's maybe not yours, or when people are asking you questions, it enriches your ability to understand what happened. Mm-hmm. And then behavioral tied to that. So not just knowing the egg and life cycle, whether or not your queen is going out, how long it should take for her to come back, which is all part of biology, but then understanding what you should be seeing behaviorally inside the hive, like opening up a hive and they're running around like kids on a sugar rush. Mm-hmm. That is usually an indicator that they've either lost their queen or something's wrong, and you need to find out why. So that's when it's time to do a deep dive into your hive and take a serious look at it. Sometimes you open up a hive and they're just toddling around, happy as clams, and they're probably fine. There's nothing wrong with them because they're telling you that before you ever come in. I always tell it's not just a one-time experience. You want to experience the hive by using like your nose. Is there a rotting smell? Is something bad? Is something spoiled? That's an indicator of a problem. Unless there's goldenrod inside the hive, that's probably just the smell of your honey. Right. But whenever you're looking inside of the hive, and you see the behavior has changed. Well, you can ask yourself, is it the weather? Because your pressure systems changes bees' behavior. Or did the sun just set? Did that last night? That also changes their behavior. But if they're running around like that, excited, over frantic, something's already going on, something's wrong. And so understanding the biology of how they work is very important. And then on that deeper level, not just the food, not just the mating, not just knowing when the queen is gone, but I've learned about, in the past 2 years, I've learned more about pheromones and how they respond to it. So I have occasional people who are coming in, they're like, my queen is there, I spotted her, everything's good to go. There's eggs, larvae, pupa, there's plenty of space, and they're still trying to make queens. Why? And more and more that I've studied, it's potentially a pheromone lack. Nothing that anyone can control, but if she's not producing the correct kind of mixtures of smells, maybe one of her gland sets is not functioning properly, they're like, she's not working, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to replace her. And I knocked out cells on them over and over and over again. Sometimes I tell people, you just got to let it ride. You got to see what's going to happen, because they're going to tell you, and you're going to learn from the experience, good or bad. So that
they know
biology. It's very important.
It is very important. And the bees know, they're in there 24/7. We can't sense the pheromone. We don't have that ability, but they do. So, I mean, what a great lesson. You've evolved into such a teachable moment there, is that if a hive just continues to try to regenerate a queen, there's obviously something wrong. There's something wrong we're not catching. And you do just kind of sometimes have to let them drive the bus for a minute, and then us catch up as the beekeeper in the end. I want to back up on one thing about biology that is helpful, in that when we're having to trade resources back and forth, as part of that biology is being able to age even capped comb. We knowing that comb caps, or that the cell is capped approximately day 9, and we're going to go to day 21 for a worker cell. If I need bees, if I go in a hive and I see that I'm low on population, but I've got a ton of capped brood, I can almost look at that with the shade of the brown that capping is, whether it's very, very light, it's newly waxed over,
or domed.
Very, very dark. I know that within days, if it's very dark brown, within days, I'm going to have a population explosion. So this is all part of it, is that I can take a sigh of relief if I'm going in and seeing that, my population's dwindled down, which, we just, a few months ago came out of winter, and then we're now going to be in dearth here at population peak, and then start to decline before we know it. Capped brood's going to be our friend and what we're looking for. So anyway, that's all good stuff. Good stuff. How do you address a laying worker?
How do I address a laying worker? Interestingly enough, I had somebody bounce a new idea off me. I'm going to try eventually, but my normal method is, if I catch it early, if it's early stages, most common times when they're creating laying workers is going to be in the fall usually, and or late summer. It's usually when that second year queen or that new queen just wasn't going to make it through the winter, and she just kind of goes away. And because of that, what happens is they're going to try to make a queen. Well, if they're unsuccessful making a queen, and one of the reasons this is so common in the fall is because they're usually unsuccessful in the fall. There aren't nearly enough drones for mating inside of the environment. A poorly mated queen comes in, she lays for a few weeks, and then she just disappears. And I've had it happen. Had it happen twice on the same hive. And then they developed a laying worker, and it was in summertime. And so whenever I have a laying worker, if I catch it early, I will do the shake method. It means I usually, especially if it's a big hive, it most commonly is, I'll load it up on a wagon and I'll drive it away, preferably a couple of acres, but at least 3 to 6 yards, depending on what availability you have space-wise. I try to get it a couple of acres away. And then what I'll do is I'll go in there with my hive tool and I'll break apart all those frames until they're loose and I can jostle it. Now, this method, if you're not gentle, you can absolutely break frames. I have a good touch with it, fingers crossed. And I don't usually have this problem, but they actually do sell replacement ears for those frames if something happens and it's a full frame of brood. So I don't worry about it too much. And I take it out and I just shake it really hard. And once I shake it out, all those bees start falling out, and I give it a good brushing around, and I do the next one and the next one, because usually it's 2-3 boxes big. And then I drag it back over to its old location with the bottom board sitting there, and I stack them up, and all those bees are buzzing back. They're coming back. And as they come back, what's happened is the worker bees, and again, this is tied to that biology section, the worker bees that are laying eggs, there's usually more than one, are too heavy. Their ovaries are overdeveloped, even though they're unable to lay female eggs, and they can no longer lift their way back. They can't fly back to the hive. So they lay there, they're going to die. They're not going to make it. They usually are trying to crawl back. That's why the distance. You want to be further away from your hive. And once they go back in, if they're left alone, they'll redevelop laying workers. That misfire is still there. They're just going for that last biological hoorah. And what they're going to do is create new ones. So normally I put a queen in right away. And I scrape out a good chunk of her candy. I love bobby pins. They work really well for that. So I scrape out a good chunk of her candy. So there's very little to chew through, because they've usually been queenless a little while. And I'll put the queen in. Now, if they don't take the queen, forget it. I'm not going to play patty cake with these guys. You talk about nursing hives that won't make it. And I've tried it like most beekeepers out there, and it never worked for me. So if they don't take that first queen and I don't see her out and about week and a half, I'm going to shake them again, put them back in that location, let all the bees come back, and usually at dusk I'll go over to a queen right healthy hive. And you want it to be healthy. You don't want just a piddly little hive. They're not going to do as well. And I'll put a sheet in, I'll lift off the lids, because I have the telescoping cover, inner cover. I'll put a sheet of newspaper on there, and then I'll take the boxes, and if it's 2 boxes or 3 boxes, I'll split it up between colonies. That's not a problem. But I'll stick it on top of that colony, and I'll allow them to chew through that paper and get all the way down into the hive. Because by the time they chew through that paper, they're like, fabulous, it smells like a queen. And I am almost 100% successful. Again, knock on wood, never swear to it, but I'm almost 100% successful, and that works well for me. Good. Someone I was speaking to says that she likes to actually shake out the hive and then play a little switcheroo, where she put the queen right hive back in the same location. I haven't tried it, but it's an interesting thought. So maybe I'll try it the next time I have a laying worker. I don't have too many per year. They're kind of an unusual problem.
They are. And, it takes about 3 weeks for a laying worker to crop up, because you've got to, that whole cycle has got to come and go of queenlessness for that to actually happen. But the reversing those locations is in a presentation James and I have done many times. It absolutely works, and I suggest anyone do it. It pretty much guarantees that the good hive in that in the bad location is going to take charge, and they're not going to let that happen. Anybody coming back into that location after you've shaken the bees, they're just going to say, no, that we're not having that here. That wasn't
that weird attitude out of here.
That's right. So both are very good, and your description of how to do that shaking out and getting it back is perfect. And you're completely right that if they don't take a new queen, combine it, be done. It's they're just not going to. They're just not going to, for whatever reason. They're just not going to. That's super good information. And y'all forgive me, because I went down a list, and I'm picking topics I know she's very good at and very versed, and I'm doing it for you. So it's all good. I'm doing it for you. Single deep or double deep? I love this one. I love this one. You talk about.
Well, before I answer this, what do you do?
Well, both. We do both. And we also, and I hate to put a period at the end of this before you even get started, but we kind of let the hives tell us what they want to do, because some of them just don't seem to be in the location that they're in. We've got some that in a particular location that just never really seem to do that second box well. So we just do box and a half with, so we call that single deep.
Yeah. It's a single deep brood box. Maybe there's brood in the upper box.
Yeah.
So it depends. I play a lot of tricks with my hives. My original education was with a single deep box, a second medium box that was used as a brood box,
Mm-hmm.
and then a third box for honey. And sometimes they were both honey. You'd extract them, and one would stay on the hive for the
Right.
season. And that worked very well for me. But there's a lot more risk with swarming.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I've progressed and I do more splits and I have more hives, it is to my benefit to have a double deep system because it makes it simple to move frames back and forth. I don't have to fiddle with them.
Sure.
And I still keep mediums for my honey supers, but that way they stay clean and clear of any kind of problems because I don't raise bees in it. I did have one hive that absolutely refused to come out of their mediums, and I finally got rid of them. I was like, so I prefer deep boxes, and of course the problem with that is that they are heavy.
Yeah.
I recommend for all of you. I may be younger, but I absolutely use a back brace because I want to protect myself. So use a back brace if you're going to be lifting these heavy boxes, and of course lift them correctly from the legs. But I love a double deep system. Primarily, it's a double deep system. I told you I play tricks. So for instance, I've done a lot of splitting this year. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of single deeps, and I'll put a medium on there and I'll pull honey off of it, and then I'll pull honey, put it away, put a deep on there, and have them grow into that. And so sometimes I play tricks, but it has to do with what I'm needing to do. If I'm not prioritizing pulling honey and I just want to raise bees, I'll use nothing but deeps. They're very handy. For sure. Of course, you get to that fall month. This last October, we had a wonderful little honey flow that happened. And I had one hive that just kept building wax. And the other hives weren't doing it. And I was like, fabulous. And so I kept switching frames out from one hive to the other. So I filled up all the rest of my boxes with that one hive. It just kept pulling frames. And I didn't want to put a honey super on it right then. I had no intention of collecting honey. It was a wonderful year for goldenrod. And anyone who smelled goldenrod, it smells kind of like a dead mouse to me. Some people say
dirty socks, something rotten for sure.
Something bad. Something's rotten in Denmark.
Yeah. Yeah. No, oh gosh, I hope y'all caught those tidbits in there. She used that box as a factory, a wax factory is what you did. You took advantage of something they were doing and doing well and made it a resource for your other hives. That's one reason why it's so important to have more than one. We typically, the majority of our hives are double deeps because we're producing honey. As honey producers, we get more. It's, and not that this needs to be your deciding factor, because a lot of beekeepers, especially our hobby beekeepers, are doing it for either the ag part of it, be able to get an ag exemption or whatever, or the fun of it. So if it's not for that and you need to do production, that's when you can really start playing tricks like what Shannon's talking about and do what works well. And for us, double deeps does, because in our experience and everything I've read and researched and written about is that if you've got a really large family, you're going to gather more groceries. If you've got a smaller family, you're going to gather the groceries to fit that family. So we get, in my belief, more honey production from a double deep. But having said that, they are heavy.
If you ever want someone to disagree with you in the nicest possible way, gentleman named Ruben Chan in our area. He came into our club and did a wonderful talk on single deep beekeeping. And I wasn't able to be there, but he changed some people's mind about honey production. That being said, I'm definitely a double deep person myself. So
yeah, James is, and he wrote a really super article. Anybody wants to go dig back through the archives of running single deep management. And you certainly can. It
takes a lot of attention.
It does.
You can't afford to ignore them. They can run out of food in an instant. They can overflow and swarm extremely quickly, and you have to have multiple hives so you can be moving frames around on a continual basis.
And for somebody really wanting to play with bees, really and truly just play with bees and play that, cat mouse game, I say because you can really be very successful. I just, James has the patience. I don't. I want to go work bees and get back so I can do these things for you. So, well, that's a good answer. I'm always open to other folks' suggestions because, we don't know everything, do we, Shannon?
No, not at all. Always something to learn.
We're always something to learn. And there's always, and area specific too. You know, we're Southeast Texas, you're North Texas, and a lot of folks listening to this will be, you know, mid-nation or even northern in the United States. And your area will do a lot to depict on what works best for you. We can just throw it out there and say, you know, this is what we do. But it's a trial and error, really, isn't it? It's just trial and error.
One of the cool things about doing single deeps, if you choose to do so, is being able to extract multiple times. That's one of the features of running a single deep, because they have no food storage down by the brood nest. So it's all up in the upper supers.
Right.
So you can harvest a lot of honey off of them. But you're right about the groceries question.
Mhm.
They do collect more in general, but if you don't have a lot of equipment, you have to pull and re-extract multiple times. They'll fill it up faster because it already smells like home. It already smells like honey, and it's already pulled. Very beneficial. But if you're doing that, you can actually extract different colors per season and potentially put it in a honey show. We just had Monica, who's one of our state honey judges, and she was down speaking at our club, and she was showing a video of 3 different colors coming out of the same bee yard. And it's truly amazing the wide variety in color you can get from early spring to fall. And a lot of people are surprised because Texas honey is very dark, and right next to a honey shelf. It's very dark in color, almost reddish.
Yeah.
Most of my honey is too, but every now and then when the weather's perfect and the air is right, you're going to have a beautiful light gold color. When you get into northern states, it's much more common for them to have a lighter colored honey. Yeah. And of course, different flavors to go with that. By the way, I think there's a purple honey that tastes like grape jelly that's floating around, and it's a weed that's awful in the Carolinas. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'm sure that somebody listening to this will be able to tell us.
Oh, I want to try. Oh, I want to try it.
I believe it's sumac, or no, it's a binding weed that gets into crops and is awful, but it makes a bright neon purple honey. I would love to try that.
For certain, I'm gonna Google it anyway. If anybody knows, send me a link on that. That's awesome.
Or better get a jar.
Yeah. See, yes. We'd be your ultimate testers, right? Yes. Send one to Shannon and to me. Okay. so we don't have to split it up. Okay. Speaking of hive inspections, so gosh, I'll tell you, we coined it, and I'm sure we didn't invent it, so I'm not going to take total credit for it. Years ago, deep hive dive or hive check. When do I do a hive dive? When do I do a hive check? And we have a seasonal. I have a seasonal answer, but I'd like your answer on if a beekeeper were to call and ask you, am I supposed to be going and doing a full hive inspection right now, or am I just supposed to be just peeking in and see?
That I'm probably going to be an unusual answer for that. I generally do a full hive check, but my hive check might look different from yours. I do a full hive check almost year round, regardless of winter. In fact, winter is one of the times I want to make sure I get all the way to the bottom, because those bees naturally move up and they'll trick you. They'll say, oh, I'm full. I'm all at the top. You open up that lid, they're boiling out, looking beautiful. And your first thing to do is and you open up that box and flip it on its end, and sure enough, there's none below it. They're just all in that top box.
Yep.
I'm always watching for that. It fooled me. Fooled me once, but don't fool me twice. A lot of times I have people go, well, they were full. Last week I said, did you check the bottom box? And they were like, no. So I generally do a once a week check. Right now with 3 bee yards that I have currently, this time of year, I've been having to do every other because the weather, I haven't been able to get into all of them in one segment. But because of that, I would say I like a once a week check. And my hive checks, usually I will always break down to the bottom box. Wow. But I'm fast. Yeah. It's unusual probably because, like I said, you go in and you start to see things and you see it almost immediately. I almost never look for the queen. So I'm not having to go through every frame. Usually what I do is I'll open up the first box and I'll move off frame in, pop it, pull one out, gently check, make sure the queen's not there, set it down. And then I'll go through 1, 2, 3, and I'll look normally right in the middle of the brood nest. Do I see eggs and larvae? Is their behavior normal? And I go to the next one if I don't see eggs and larvae until I do. And then I'll pop it off, look at the bottom, and file through a little bit. And if I'm not seeing good activity there, I may flip the boxes depending on the time of year. Well, and because of that, I almost always look at that bottom box. I may not look at every frame, but I almost always pull out a couple of frames in each box, and then I pack them up and put it away. My hive checks take 5 minutes at most. So it is a very quick process for me, unless I see something wrong, which most of the time, because I'm checking regularly, I catch it very quickly.
For sure.
And it lowers my loss ratios. Now, that being said, people are successful checking them once a month. They're normally very productive, but they can catch you unawares. And sometimes the sign of things that have happened has already gone. I've had a lot of people, especially in the wintertime, who call and they're like, well, what happened? And I'm like, okay, well, can you send me pictures? What are we looking for? Are there shreds of wax on the bottom board? Are there dead bees out the front? Is there brood still in there? We're looking for these signs. And if they're like, I don't know, I haven't opened it since September and it's now March, you're like,
yeah,
I don't know. There's all the
No, but-
evidence has been obscured once I'm not looking at it regularly. So I do a deep dive inspection almost every time, unless I'm doing something quick, like I know they're queenless and I'm opening them up. I usually have a frame pre-marked and I'm putting a queen in there. So that's a quick inspection for me. And all that is pulling off the lid, removing a frame, putting my queen in, putting it back together. Or if I'm pulling an observation hive, I do that too.
Yeah.
But other than that, not a common thing for me not to do a full check.
And see, and what I kept hearing was you did it fast. You
Yes.
know, you're able to do that. So we almost don't separate hive dive from hive check because you're doing them fast. You're going in and you're taking care of it. And probably that's where we differ. Okay. So our hive dive is going through and checking, maybe not every frame, but virtually all frames. And then the hive check is pretty much what you described, but maybe not going down to that bottom box every week, but for sure every 2 to 3 weeks, for sure. I call it bottom box neglect. And for new beekeepers, it's not bottom box fear, especially if they got 2, right? We've got 2 bees and we're so
People don't
afraid.
want to squish bees. That's why.
I don't want
They
to
don't wanna
squish bees. Plus that top box is heavy, or it can't, bees are lighter. It's the honey that's heavy. So at the very least, tilt up that top box. You know, you're going through, then you're going to tilt up that top box because they will fool you. You're totally correct. But one thing I want to point out that really, I don't think that even some tenured beekeepers have put words to this, but every inspection is 3 inspections. It's the one you had before, it's the one you're doing now, and it's the one you're going to do next time. Because you got to think about, what did I see last time? That's going to help me decide whether what I'm seeing now is good, bad, or indifferent. Okay. And what I'm seeing now is preparing me for what I may see next time. So I've got to react or act on what I'm seeing now to prepare for that next hive inspection, or to at least give me a leg up on that next one. So you really are doing 3 in 1. It's the before, the during, and the after each and every time. Once I put my head around that, I was really able to start making more sense of each one of those inspections and putting them more into perspective of what I'm seeing and what I'm supposed to do with that. Because we have to interpret what we're seeing and react, right?
It's true. I guess I don't even think about it because you talk about full frames brood, capped brood, and I'm like, oh, bring another box next time. That's the preparation for the next.
That's it. It's exactly.
Or if I'm in the previous one, where did they have a queen? Was everything good? If it's different now, why? Always an intentional portion of taking care of your hives. I think I just never noticed it.
Well, you just everybody compartmentalizes the way they do things. They develop it in their own minds. Do you take notes, or do you
So no, I'm a terrible note taker. I think I tried best practices where I came out with my clipboard and marked things off.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to take notes much more for my master craftsman level study. And so I'm happy to walk out there with a clipboard and jars and different pens and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I am doing a good job of that. But fortunately, I don't have to do that every week. That's a lot of work. However, I would say that I'm terrible at taking notes the way I talk to myself, because I do have more hives than what I can remember happened with each of them. First off, when I make my splits, I normally make them all at once. And so they're all at the same stage, same timing. So I'm generally taking out feeders just a couple weeks apart, and I'm adding frames just a couple weeks apart. And so they're all in the same stages. And then when they're ready, I'll just put like a check mark on the top, because they're disposable boxes.
Right.
When it comes to my single story hives, I would say I don't take notes at all. I'll use bricks and I'll talk to myself with the bricks, because I don't have the notebook. I should. It's really a good idea. But I'll put a brick on top, and if it's just facing the same direction as the entrance, nice and straight in the middle, everything's good. Hives at a normal level, whatever's going on. If it's at the back, they're starving. If it's at the front, they need another box, they're full. If it's sideways, they're not queen right. And if it's off kilter, then something's wrong. I don't know what. Keep an eye on. And so I talk to myself with bricks, if you will.
It's a code.
I can be a little bit thick, I guess.
No, I love it. It's a code. You have your own
It is.
code.
It's my private code, and everybody seems to develop their own.
We do. We use sticks, or, we don't too much put bricks on the top of our hives. We used to, but we haven't in a long time. But for sure, we've done that. Just take a stick and lay it one way or the other. Or
yes.
The best advice I think I can ever give somebody about that is to get something you can erase, and those China pens. They're wax. I usually have one in here. It's a wax pen.
Oh, for writing on the top.
And I write on the lid, and I only write things like like when we install a mite treatment, I'll write the date, because we don't treat all of our hives because they're in different locations. I won't necessarily treat them all at the same time, especially if they don't all need to be treated. So in a lot of treatments, you have to pull after a certain amount of days, right? So I'll write the day, or if I've requeened one and I haven't, then we'll put, a date on the top, and that you can just use your glove and you can erase it and change the information on it. Or I'll put if for some reason the feeder gets moved from one side, I'll put an arrow where the feeder is, so that we can just do to feed just that side.
Those wax pens are an interesting idea. I haven't ever used them, but like I said, I don't usually write. It's just this past year, all of them have numbers on them for that test that I'm studying and that I'm working on. And so I am writing on the top, like requeen such and date, queen confirmed such and date. And if I'll do a test, I know it will go on there too. And then I'll take a picture of it, because I need to remember it. And I'm bad at taking notes sometimes, as said.
Well, I am too. We used to think, because there was two of us, that we could remember.
It's worse, because you're relying on the other person to remember parts you forgot. And you're like, well, why don't you remember that?
They're going to remember it completely different than you will. Completely. We would say, oh, no, that was that. No, nope, it was that. And so then you've learned nothing. You have to go back out there and go, wait a minute, what did we do? So really and truly, whatever works for you. I like the brick system or stick system, or write on the lid, whatever works for you. But being able to keep up is really, that's the main thing. You may have a memory like nobody's business, but that was not
for names. I don't.
No, not for that at all. Let's see. This one. And this one I kind of pulled out of my hat, because I get asked this, and I'm not ever real sure. I always come up with a good answer, because we're beekeepers, have been for a minute. So why do you think colonies abscond for the most part?
That's a tough one.
It is.
Because sometimes there's not an explanation that's visible. A huge percentage of absconds that I would assume, depending on the time of year, especially if it's happening in fall or early winter, is generally going to be attributable to varroa mites, potentially. Right. Every now and then, if they're overrun by a pest, but they're usually very weak before that point, and most of the time the beekeepers catch it, so it's a much smaller ratio. I would say, like if the whole hive is slimed, which I have seen, it was absolutely gross, by hive beetles. But for most abscondings, stress can be a cause, And then sometimes we just don't have an answer. I know that there's a wonderful lady who worked here previously and had to step away for family reasons. She was just doing a lot of home care, but she keeps bees at a facility that does radio testing. And without fail, they would leave. She would get them to her house, feed them up. They'd be doing great. She'd put them out on the property. And usually 3 weeks in, they'd be gone. And she did it over and over and over and over again for their
Well, I think we know what was going on.
I know something was bothering them in the environment. So there are some places bees just don't want to
Don't
be.
live.
And I kind of think it was tied to the radios. I cannot prove it. I have no evidence whatsoever, but she was a knowledgeable beekeeper. All her other hives were thriving. Whenever she'd take them back to her house, whenever they'd get weak or small, they would be fine. They'd build up. She'd put them back out. They'd go away, usually about 3 to 4 weeks. And so it was a consistent cycle. So sometimes there's things that's beyond our knowledge. Yeah. I had a very interesting customer call actually, and he wanted to know if the sound of someone doing Bitcoin mining was going to bother his bees. Because apparently it makes it sound a bit like an air conditioner at a very low hertz level. And I'm like, well, sir, I don't know. I haven't ever been next to a Bitcoin mine, but you'll have to tell me how that works out. And it's interesting because bees are extremely sensitive to sound. I've diverted it slightly, but they're extremely sensitive to sound. They don't like it. I'll listen to music on my phone, like in my pocket. I have a chest pocket right here. And you will see sometimes people will go ahead and have, if you have a little bit of like violins or pitched high material, they'll start stinging the phone. They'll go for the phone. They'll be like, what is that awful noise? But if you're listening to a little R&B blues or you're looking into something a little bit deeper in tone, they don't mind it. Same thing with a weed eater. They hate the tone of a weed eater. That high pitch, they'll sting everything they can touch. But they won't mind a large tractor because they make that boop, 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 boop sound. So tones, they're extraordinarily sensitive to. There could be something floating around. We don't know what's causing it. But also, sometimes it's just stress. I've had 3 absconds, and all of them were in the same year, and all of them were attributable to mites. Every one of them. Yeah. And I've never had it since or before. I've never come out to a hive that was empty since or before, because what happened was the way I was keeping bees changed. I started out because I was a kid and I couldn't afford it. I didn't exactly just have money flying around. I did not get my treatments. I did all the natural ways that I could possibly do, such as using, they didn't have drones at the time. I had rose green bottom boards, powdered sugar, brood breaks, queen, allowing them to raise their own queen. I did all of those things. And I was very successful. I was treatment free for probably the first 10 to 12 years of my beekeeping career. And then I started changing the way I was keeping bees. I wanted the hobby to pay for itself. I needed them to produce more honey. I needed them to produce more bees. And so I started feeding and increasing. And I lost, for the first time after increasing, I went from 10 hives to 30 in 1 year. Wow. And it went well. It was going well. I made honey off of all of them. It was a great year to start with. I can't take credit for the weather, but it was a good year. And because of that buildup, I wasn't used to treating because I'd never had to treat. I did other methods, but I wasn't doing those methods anymore. And I lost 3 hives that fall, and they were all within a week of each other. Oh. 2 of them on 1 week and 1 on the next week. And I went to my mentor, Janet Rowe, who was my predecessor in the teacher position. And I was like, what happened? She's like, mites. She's like, are you testing? I can see her saying that. No. And so a lot of times I think that it's mites. Sometimes it's stuff we just don't understand.
Well, and boy, that's for sure. Put a pin in that one. It is a lot of times just what we can't understand. But I think that even if you say it's mites, that still falls under the stressor. It's still a stress. And odds are, if bees leave, they're leaving the stress, whether it's the sound you're talking about, the environment you're talking about, the conditions, all of it reverts back to a stress. And just to say this before we have to wrap up, which is really, gosh, this went by quick, is that you can't always see when Varroa is the problem. It's not,
Won't. It's not something most
it is
people
not a
ever see with
visual.
their eyes.
So they know that we kind of almost made full circle here, right? Is the bees are the ones that are in there and they're living it. And so they know what the problem is. And if they have a chance, because they're going to survive, they're going to die trying to survive, to perpetuate their species. And they literally will, but in some situations, they view it as, I die if I stay, I may die if I go, but I know I've got certain,
I've got to leave here.
yeah.
When it comes to mites, it's the 20 other diseases they carry with them.
Right.
So a lot of times adult honeybee diseases won't be visible. Very few times. I remember the first time I saw a shiny bee. I was like, shiny? Why is it shiny? Well, first off, robbing can cause that, or robbing, fighting against robbing, or just going out and fighting for food at the same feeder. So open feeding can cause that shiny bee.
Yeah.
But it was all hunched over. And it was, its abdomen was foreshortened, its wings looked extended slightly. And I was like, what's wrong with that? So I started doing some research and I got myself a really good book. There's a purple book just behind me about honeybee disease, a little dated, but still very good.
It's very
and
good.
It was really interesting because I was like, oh, it probably has a disease, but it's not visible. It's not visible to the naked eye, and very few people would notice it. This hive was riddled with shiny bees. And so the number one thing I did is I checked for mites. Their mite levels were through the roof. Yeah. It was a friend's hive I was going through. She's like, I don't know why they're not thriving. And I was like, okay, I got mite treatment in my truck. We're going to put a mite treatment on them right now. You're going to do this. You said you're going to feed. They're starving. They're hungry. It was a really hot summer period. And I was like, and I have super DFM in my truck and I really like it. It doesn't fix diseases.
Good product.
It helps with the digestion system. Mm-hmm. And so it just makes one stressor go away. So I'll sprinkle a little of that on. And I gave some to her and I said, reapply it weekly. And that hive recovered, made honey the next year with a mite treatment on it, food in its belly, and stressors that had been lowered. It really helped. But those things people won't see. Varroa mites you won't see. People get fooled by that all the time. I have people call and say, I didn't see any. I'm like, you won't. You usually won't. Very rarely will you spot them. And if you need glasses, you definitely won't.
Well, that's why we have to test. That's why we have to test. And summertime, we'll get ready, everybody, because that's coming up. I want to, gosh, there's two more. I may jump both of them anyway. Okay. So, I want to do European foul brood because that seems to fall. That is something that those of us that have been in deluge rain with this spring have, I won't say we are dealing with it, but I'm hearing about it. Okay. Mm-hmm. But we could be, I mean, we very easily could be, our bees are high and dry, but let's talk a little bit about European foul brood and what that really means to a beekeeper. If you feel comfortable getting up in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We'll keep it kind of short.
Okay. Keeping it super brief. When it comes to European foul brood, let's start with what the basis of European foul brood is. It is a honeybee bacterium, lives in the gut of the developing honeybee. The adult honeybees are carriers of it, but they are immune to it at that point. It's kind of a childhood disease, if you will. And so it's going to affect uncapped brood, generally speaking. And what happens is during trophallaxis, the sharing of food, is that little baby is inundated with this particular virus and starts eating on its own food, and it starts feeding off of the bee, and they suffer and struggle, and they'll usually die in the cell, creating a withered, dead appearance. Yeah. How you can cope with that, there's very few ways. Like there was some antibiotics that were on the system. In fact, we had somebody ask us, but you don't have to shake your head. I know they're not considered effective anymore because, as we know, most bacterium are smart. This particular bacterium has a lot of transcription errors, which means it becomes resistant to the antibiotic that it's being treated with very quickly. And because of that, I don't recommend using antibiotics. But because it is based in the gut of the baby honeybee, that's one of the reasons Super DFM comes back into it. It's not a miracle product. It's a probiotic. It lowers the stress level. Right. One of the things that causes it to flare up, because like I said, it lives inside of the adult honeybee, it's just around, is caused to flare up by stressful situations, such as food fluctuating up and down, which is what's happening right now,
Yeah.
or if you're dealing with a time of dearth, or of course varroa mites. So the number one thing is keep your food good, keep your varroa mites under control is number two. And if you do spot it, sometimes your queen is responsible. There are queens with more susceptibility. Like I love my cousins, but my cousins have a tendency to get strep throat. As growing up, I think they had strep throat 2 to 3 times a year growing up. They don't anymore. But during that time, they were highly susceptible to it, and their family was more particularly susceptible to it than ours. I could hang out around them, we'd have a great time, and we wouldn't be sharing it because I wasn't immunocompromised in that way. Because of that, I would tell you the number one thing you can do if you have access to it is exchange your queen. So killing off your old queen, getting a new queen, because those older queens are going to be much more susceptible to passing on a weakness in the genes. Now, after that, of course, the food, the varroa mites, and then you can use your super DFM. It is something that can be avoided. It is something you'll usually recover from. Like I said, it lives in the system. It's just around, kind of like having a cold. It looks nasty and it's very scary.
Yes.
There is such a thing as American foul brood and European foul brood. They are not in any way the same. American foul brood is a spore-based bacterium, and it can live for up to 50 years in the equipment. And then the European foul brood mostly is shared inside the food, which is one of the reasons you don't ever feed honey from unknown sources. Okay, that's my quick little blurb. Were there any more questions?
Love it. Love it. I love that. Perfect. And I'm not even going to add to it. I was going on and I thought, nah, can't be better than that. Good job. So I'm going to finish this off with dealing with nervous neighbors, or even worse, a neighbor that has been affected by your mean hive.
This is the one that I'm probably not qualified to answer because
Really?
I don't have neighbors super close. But what I would say is, first off, discretion is the better part of valor sometimes in this case, and keeping it quiet that you have bees is sometimes desirable. It's not always possible, but it's desirable. If it's not possible, then your groundwork is the most important thing. So going in, making sure that they know how important they are, how excited you are, and you as a beekeeper not going into your hive during that time, providing them with a separate water source, which is not your neighbor's pool, and making sure that they have as much honey as they need so they like you.
Yes.
But other than that, apologies are important. Yeah. Some of the time, the homeowners association has the right to remove them. So keeping on good track with your neighbors, making sure you don't deal with swarming, because that goes directly to your neighbors usually. Making sure you're not dealing with swarming, and potentially controlling the size of your colony is important. So perhaps you start up a little business selling brood frames to keep your colony down to a more manageable size.
Great idea.
Not mine, Becky Barajas, who's at our Round Rock store. Like, what about selling frames? So it's not mine. I can pass that credit on.
No, that's awesome. That's a great idea. Well, because I've got experience in it, I'm gonna just add a couple of things to that.
Okay.
You hit the one key is the size of the hive. Requeening, absolutely, you have to make sure that you requeen every year. There's not an exception. If you're living in a suburban where you got neighbors, you have a responsibility as a beekeeper to requeen every year with good genetics, not just let the hive, doesn't mean let the hive requeen every year. That means you requeen with a good quality queen genetic every year, and do thwart the size of the hives, because there's power in numbers. And when you do get a hive that's too large, it can cause issues, and they can be more aggressive than passive, only because there's so many of them and they're trying to manage their space, and it's almost like they become more agitated the larger they get. Just our experience for the first time in a lot of years, and I know a lot of you know this very brief part of our world, is that we've always been on a farm, but we moved to a subdivision where we have a half an acre, which may sound like a lot to some, but believe me, compared to a farm, it's not. So we have bees out here, but a problem that we ran into not long ago was that our hives attracted a swarm pharaoh hive in a group of trees on our property, that in that hive was bad. And we started having issues, and we thought, surely it's one of our hives, because you wouldn't think that something would have moved in, but your bees attract other bees. If you've never heard that, it's the truth. And we had to deal with that, and they did unfortunately bother our neighbor. No more really than if they bothered us, but we were able to locate it, and I will say it no longer exists because they were bad. But you just have to be a beekeeper and not a bee haver. And I think, Shannon, you'll agree with that. We just have to manage our bees. Do what you suggested and manage, do your hive inspections, your hive checks really often, so you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And be prepared that you've got to do something. If you see something, you have a responsibility, because your neighbor didn't take the beekeeping course at the Bee Supply and got to sit in front of Shannon and learn all these wonderful things. They may not even like bees. So you have a responsibility to really manage that. That's all I got on that. But what would you got anything you want to send us off with? A great tip that's,
I would say it's if you're a beekeeper and you've been doing this a couple of years, we are a fabulous resource. But I'm a big promoter of being involved in clubs, because there's for usually like the second to third to fourth year beekeeper, maybe your life got busy, maybe you lost a lot of hives, and it sort of kicks you in the pants. I would say the people who stake with it and are most involved and most educated are the ones that start going to a club, start meeting with other beekeepers and bouncing ideas and finding a community there, because it gives some perspective to what you're going through. Oh, this was a terrible year. I couldn't make any splits. Nothing took. But everyone's like, oh yeah, the queen breeding has been awful this year, which it has because of all the weather. 40% losses. That's something that allows you to have perspective. And it's also encouraging to do life with people, to do beekeeping with people is no different. So if you're finding yourself dried out or uninterested or not wanting to get in your hives because maybe you weren't being the best steward, go find a beekeeping club, go get involved with humans, everyday humans. Not that we aren't fabulous and that the Bee Supply doesn't have great videos, which we, by the way, get some great compliments on regularly. But it doesn't mean that there's not actual people to talk to and people's hives nearby to go visit.
perfect. I mean, there's nothing better than somebody right there in your own neighborhood that's, in your own community that's got a similar situation. That's going to be a great resource. Very good, Shannon. I mean, I will have her back, y'all, because I think we may do this quarterly, because there's so much, you're such a book of knowledge. And sometimes we just need to talk bees, sometimes we just need to talk bees. And that's what we did today, wasn't it?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. We'll be in touch.
All right. Bye. Have a great
Bye,
day.
everybody.